Okay, well, welcome everybody. Henry Delangelo here, live from the Your Key to College studios in Fairfield, Connecticut. So excited tonight to start off the school year with the authors of this book. Oh, and my virtual background makes it a little bit loopy. Maybe I can do this,
That's
but I
good.
don't get to see that. Great. This is the I think fourth or fifth year that I've had the pleasure and the privilege to have conversations with Laurie and Stephanie. They really are experts in this field, and I'm going to let them kind of give a little bit of their background because I could not do it justice. But the one thing that I always will say to people as they're asking, like, what should we do and what are some of the resources? It is always this book, right? Because this really becomes the what to expect when you're expecting. This is what to expect when you send your child off to college. So why don't we start with a brief introduction I think Stephanie was here first, so we'll start with Stephanie.
All right. So, well, thank you, Henry. We love to be with you and talk to the people that you work with, the parents and families. So my name is Stephanie Carter. I'm the director of the Academic Center for Excellence and the Writing Center at Bryant University. So I've been working one-on-one and with groups of students over the last 20 plus years, especially with first-year students in their transition from high school to college. And over the past about 10 years, Laurie and I have been working a lot on research about how parent involvement and engagement influences our first-year students' experience. And so I'm really thrilled to talk with you tonight, Henry, as always, and Nina and anyone else who jumps in. So thanks for having us.
Laurie.
So I was trying to start off the Zoom experience with a case study approach of what first year students are going through this year in terms of accessing technology during a pandemic. So I was having a little bit of trouble logging on, but it all worked out, thankfully. So I am the Assistant Dean of Student Success at Bryant University, and what that means is I oversee all of the programs and services that are aimed at student success and what we say in higher ed, retention. And retention means that we think it's really important for first year students to have a healthy experience from the day that they matriculate at our universities until the day they graduate. But what we know from research in higher education is that the first year is probably one of the most critical years so that students can have a positive experience to bridge them from their first year to sophomore year, because there are so many pitfalls and challenges that they can experience during the first year. And my background is in personality psychology, so I've been studying the personality traits, attitudes, behaviors, and mindsets of first year students. And I often tell my students that higher education is designed to ask big questions. So one of the big questions that I've asked myself over the years in my field is what creates success and what motivates human beings to achieve. So my area of expertise is in achievement motivation. And over the years, I focused those achievement motivation questions on that first year of college and what does it take to create success during the first year of college. So often in my courses with students, I talk to them about, like, what does it take to be successful in college? And so that's where my research begins. And what Stephanie and I began to notice over the years is that as our society has evolved in many ways and that emergent adulthood has shifted, that there is another stakeholder in higher education besides faculty, staff, and students, and that's parents. And how do parents function to mediate the stressors of transitioning from high school to college? So that's sort of the perspective that Stephanie and I come at this whole big question of what does it take to be successful in college? Well, it takes a village and it takes your parents too. So that's how the book was born, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I always get excited about talking to you guys is because it does go hand in glove with a lot of the things that I do with my students and families. And I talk to them about, it's not just about a race to get in, right? It's about a marathon of how do I, once I get there, stay in? What do I need to do to be successful? And for those people who are coming to the broadcast tonight or watching it on on tape later on, who may not know me. This may be the first exposure to me. You may have just been referred to my page. So I'm a high school counselor, and I've been in the business of education for 30 years. And I've been working with kids, getting them through high school and into college for the entire time. I'm a fellow at the Yale University's Center for Emotional Intelligence. And I think that's the cornerstone of my work with a lot of the students, because I think part of the metrics that people don't look at when looking at schools is the, the social emotional aspects of what college has to, what takes toll on a student, right? We always look at GPA and test scores, right? And if I have this GPA, that test score, I should go to this school. And I'm like, it goes so much deeper than that. And, are your, students emotionally ready to take on the rigors of college? So there's a difference between being academic and intellectual. And there's, a difference between being, emotionally ready to take on this massive change. So, all the stuff that you guys do just kind of just feeds into all the stuff that I do. And that's why I love talking to you guys. I get so excited. So I'm going to ask you to, just first, you did a nice job of kind of framing your experience, and like, wow, you could not ask for two people with more experience to write a book like this, right? And you're working hands-on with kids for, years and years. And you also have children that have gone through this, right? Or are going through this for the first time. I have 3 children. My oldest just graduated from college, and I have 2 more in, and one's a freshman right now. And on the promo earlier today that I did on my site, I said when I first started reading this book, it was almost like you guys were watching me, because I'd read a chapter and the email would come in from my daughter about that, and then I'd get around to kind of get into the next chapter. And soon after that, the phone call would come in about like that same chapter. And I'm like, oh my God, they're watching me. This is crazy, right? But you guys are so in tune to that first year experience. So, can you kind of just dive into like right now? We're not going to talk about COVID just yet, but we're going to go into COVID, right? Because it's part of it, right? And we have to recognize that, and hasn't made anything easier. But also, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? Because I think the same tools that you need to kind of get through this would be the same tools you would have needed to get through college pre-COVID. So I don't know who wants to kind of start, but just kind of talk about like right now, kids are at school, and Nina jumped on early, and she was saying that her first is off at college right now, and experiencing some things that I think are no surprise to you. Stephanie was on and said, yep, that's about right. So what are kids experiencing like right now? They're in school.
I was just thinking like, that's the beauty of the kind of qualitative research that Stephanie and I did with our book, that there are really clear patterns. If you take a case study approach and look year after year, and we've been in this business for a long time, and we often talk about the ebbs of the semester. And I know that some of the semesters are starting out a little bit differently this year, but typically during week 3, which is if your student started at the normal time of the semester, we're about to approach week 3. And you look at the culture shock literature, right? So human beings tend to have a honeymoon stage when they're in a new environment. And at the beginning, it's so excited and you're meeting people. But at about 21 days or a month, that sort of dust settles. And I feel like the pattern right now is, wow, the reality setting in. And that's where what we would say is the self-regulatory behaviors have to kick in. So they have to have that self-management, behavior management, time management ability. They have to have the ability to combat procrastination. They have to have the ability to goal set, and they have to have the ability to self-motivate. And so we know very clearly that week 3 or 4, that those needs emerge. And if your student's not prepared to cope with this sort of culture shock and the heightened, are you ready to do the work at the same time, then typically they really need help at that time. And our programs and services at Bryant are designed to like swoop in at that time. But if the college that your student is at isn't ready to kind of swoop in at that time, you as a parent want to check in and say, can you tell me a little bit about what's going on here? And I'll let Stephanie add to that as well.
So we are hitting about week 3 our institution, and for the first couple of weeks in our tutoring center, it's a little quiet. It's usually quiet for the first couple of weeks, but maybe a little quieter than usual as students are still ramping up given the new environment. And all of a sudden, yesterday, packed to the gills, students who are nervous about their first test, their first paper, their first project, and they're either seeking help, like some of the students we're seeing, or they're maybe struggling privately and not necessarily telling anybody that they're worried or nervous. So I think this is the time where they're really starting to see the difference between high school and college. And I will just speak from my own daughter's perspective. Last night, I had a conversation with her and she said, I'm doing all the reading that's on the syllabus, but then I go to class and my professor isn't talking about the reading. And I said, well, sometimes that happens. There could be so much content in that class that you're reading some material and your professor's lecturing about others, and then at some point you're going to be tested on both. And her mind exploded a little bit. She's a little bit freaked out. So we were talking about some strategies and some resources. And one of the key resources I was telling her was to really go to her professor's office hours. It feels so awkward and sounds so strange, but I feel like as a parent, or if I was talking to other parents, I would say, this is a great week to recommend to your student that you visit your professor's office hours. And even if they don't feel like they could visit all 4 or 5, choose that one class where they're maybe feeling a little bit more nervous about and reach out to that professor. And it could be that the office hours are on Zoom this semester. It might be that they need to take a little extra initiative to find out how to meet with the professor, but it's definitely time well spent.
So what I've experienced over the last several years as I've been going around visiting schools and meeting with admissions reps, I think the model that you guys have there at Bryant with the Student Success Center and really building on, that model has really been catching on. And a lot of schools are trying to kind of catch up to what you guys have already done and established and do so well. So can you kind of talk about what are those services that a parent could typically expect to see at schools? And then how do they, work with their child to get them to utilize or get there?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because my daughter went off to a college last fall, and at Bryant, like you said, our services are really integrated. And at this institution that my daughter was at, they were more compartmentalized. So I was trying to instruct her to go to different spaces and places on campus. But typically, depending on the issue that your student's having, and if it's academic, office hours are the #1. We always say to our students at Bryant, if you're having struggles with content in your courses, office hours are #1. But the close second is any kind of academic support center or tutoring center, because sometimes students are struggling in classes and they can't reflect on whether they're having trouble with the content of the course or the process of learning. And so the professors are awfully good at helping students with the content, but learning centers and writing centers and academic support centers are very good at helping students with the process of learning and really reflecting on how are they learning styles, how to master different subject areas. So those are certainly 2 really key places, right, to help students. I'd say the library, my daughter this year is a sophomore. She's 2 weeks in. She has a research paper to do. The library is her go-to right now. So those are the academic resources, but certainly at this point, sometimes students are intellectually capable, and I can case study approach. Last year, I had a mom call me and she said, Dr. Hazard, my student is getting A's and B's in all of their assessments, but he has not eaten with another human being at a meal for the first 3 weeks of school, and he's so lonely. So while he was doing very well with the academic adjustment, the social adjustment wasn't so terrific for him. And so I mobilized resources for him, and we got him involved in the student affairs side of the house, where we were trying to really get him involved with the clubs and organizations. So there would be a place on campus called the Center for Student Involvement or the Student Activity Center. So those are probably the two majors for first years, but Steph, you could probably add to that.
Yeah, one thing I was just thinking as Laurie was speaking was about how we really try to talk to our first year students, and I feel like I've tried to talk to my own kids as well about asking for help is a good thing. It's not something that they should feel embarrassed about, and it's actually the students who ask for help who end up being more successful. And if they're asking for help academically, their academic success will be better. And then just as Laurie was saying, if a student is feeling like they're not connecting or they're not getting to meet with people, asking for help in that area is huge. So if a student's living on campus, even sometimes talking to the RA, the resident assistant, is a little less threatening than feeling like, oh, I have to find this department on campus that has clubs. So I think when a student's living on campus, I will always say, talk to your RA. If it's a commuter, almost always there's a commuter department on campus, and they can sort of serve that same function.
And I think those are some really valid points. And the one thing too that you always want to do is ask good questions, right? Not just how are you doing, right? How you doing goes to the one word answer, good or okay, right? It's the question of, hey, what'd you have for lunch today? Where did you eat, right? Because I know that there are 3 different dining halls or things like that. Who'd you eat with, right? Or how is your introductory to psychology class? Do you know anybody there? Is there anyone from your dorm there, right? So that starts getting the questions out that you can then start to, as a parent, maybe triage some things, right? That I've asked a couple of times and she hasn't mentioned or he hasn't mentioned anybody new, or saying, so now maybe I need to kind of be a little bit more upfront and say, hey, have you met anyone new? And if not, have you talked to, like, I mean, I love that you said that the RA, right? Like, start locally. Like, sometimes you say, go to your professor and they're like, oh my God, it's on the other side of campus. Like, it's like forever, you know what I mean? Like, God forbid they get up early and have to walk, right? But no. You actually, if you look out your door and like look to the left or your right, you have like an RA on your floor, right? And then if that person isn't available, you have a resident director in the building, right? So what are the things that you can do locally? So like, what are some of the things that are happening in the dorms that you guys, have seen?
Yeah, I think the residence hall director and their RAs are really charged with trying to create a sense of community on their floor. So getting students to know each other a little bit more so that they're making connections with the people they're living with. But they're also charged with developing some programming. So they might have programs on how to get involved or how to stay safe physically and emotionally as a college student. And they sometimes even bring in people from other areas of campus. So every once in a while, our tutors will go in and do a session in one of the residence halls. So I think if the residence hall staff are great resources that are looking at overall health and wellness of our students. And as a result, if we as parents can say, keep an eye out for the programs that are going on in the residence hall, or if you're not really sure, as you were saying, Henry, talk to the hall director or talk to your RA to get more information. So Laurie, I don't know if there's more you'd want to say about the res life staff, sorry.
Yeah, often, and it depends on the size of the university, right? So we're a small private, and there are small privates, large privates, small publics, large publics in terms of university size. And I think the residence hall staff, like you said, Henry, is the absolute first touch point. But if your students at another type of institution, you might want to watch out for whether there are living and learning communities because oftentimes large research universities have theme-based residence halls, or they have living situations that students can opt into if they're an honors students. And so it's designed to make a large university experience feel small. And often if your students in a living and learning community, for example, there are faculty, staff, and students that are involved in helping support students in those areas. So I thought that was important to mention, depending on the university type.
Thank you. So I'm looking through the book, right? And when you look at all the dog ears I have on this book, it's like ridiculous. But we're in September, so some of the things that you kind of talk about for September issues, roommate problems, dealing with those new freedoms, and then homesickness. So if you can touch base on some of those little things to give some insights as to, yeah, this is coming, and here are some things that maybe you can do to help build the capacity of your student. I would joke with my seniors that are about to go off to college, I graduate and heading to freshman year, I'd say the summer before you go, if you've never shared a room with your sibling, then go downstairs in your basement and you and your brother or sister live in the closet, right? For, I don't know, a month, and then share one bathroom. And that kind of gets you the, what some of the dorms are like. Now, obviously some of these new dorms are like better than my first apartment, but
so sure they are.
So kind of just touch base on some of those, first month problems of, the roommates, the privacy issues, the freedoms, homesickness, that kind of stuff would be, I think, really helpful.
I feel like before we take a major plunge into that, I think something that I would say to parents is you're dealing with adolescent and emergent adults. And so the emotions are in a 24-hour period ranging from calm to hysterical, back to calm again. And so you might get a phone call at 10 o'clock in the morning and it seems like major crisis central, right? And then by the time 10 o'clock at night comes around, they're so far past that issue that arose, and you're still like,
yeah, the parent is still in there,
and you're still like anxious and spinning like a top around it. So I think that's really important for parents to remember, that students are going to be going through those emotional cycles.
Yeah, that's great.
In terms of homesickness, I feel like if I was going to give a parent a concrete strategy, would be to kind of come to an agreement and have a communication plan strategized with your student, and maybe even talk about what touch points that you could have with your student during the semester. Because I remember, like, go back to like, I'm a practitioner, right? We'll go to the case study approach. A number of years ago, I had a student who was in my intro psych class, and she comes to my office hours. Now this student is, again, doing fantastic academically, and I'm talking about Freud, the id, the ego, the superego, and she's asking me questions about class, and then all of a sudden there are teardrops going down onto the textbook. And I'm saying, oh my gosh, what's the matter? And she said, Dr. Hazard, I'm so close with my mom, and I'm not handling this well. And this was in September. And I said, oh, well, where are you from? Because I'm thinking, can I get this student a touchstone to her parent? And she said, oh, Connecticut, Connecticut.
So far.
Yeah. And I said, and she said, but my parents don't want me to come home because they think I should be engaged at college. And I said, well, your parents have given you really good advice. That's absolutely true. The better students are engaged on campus, the higher the grade point averages are likely to be. So your parents are spot on. But this particular student just was not handling the being away from home. So we did a little bit of calendar therapy, and I said, let's see if we can bridge you to a weekend at home, or bridge you to some kind of touch point with your parents. So I think if parents and students can come up with, if this happens, right, we're going to do what we call in psychology, like anticipatory problem solving. We're going to anticipate that homesickness is going to be a problem, and if it is, how are we going to solve this as a family? And so that would be some advice that I'd give parents. But
I love that.
Go for it.
No, absolutely.
Any other advice you got there?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about the roommate situation and the question Henry had sort of posed about the challenge of living with roommates. And I was thinking about how this semester, this unique 2020 year that a roommate is possibly the only person that a student might have where they're taking masks off and they're spending a decent amount of time with. And that can be for good or for bad. There's going to be some challenges that come along with it. So I think for me as a parent, my constant encouragement to both of my students who are in college is to be open-minded, to try to have empathy for their roommates, and to try to keep an open line of communication. So I've been trying to teach them some little basic counseling skills of, instead of being like, you never empty the dishwasher, which is what my junior would be saying, say, I've noticed that it feels like I'm doing a lot of this, and I'm wondering if we can work on a little balance, right? So I think our students, especially like you were saying, Henry, many of them have never lived with someone before. Laurie, I think this is your line, but like the only two places we make people live with strangers is prison and college, right? So how do we help our students? It's a very unique experience of living with someone you've never met before and perhaps didn't choose. For many of them, they didn't choose their roommate, or if they chose, it was based on some really preliminary information. So I think being a good listener about what's going on with the roommate, trying to reflect back as parents what we are hearing, to try to give a different perspective to our students about maybe we can get into our the roommate shoes better than our students who are immersed in it, and helping just kind of coach and counsel them a little if there's some challenges that are coming up.
Yeah, and I think too, helping them to establish ground rules, right, for this new experience where they've grown up in the house and kind of the rules were set for them. And now they're in a place where they have to try to establish their own, right? I know with my son, who tends to like to sleep late, before he went, I'm like, make sure you talk to your roommate, find out when his classes are, find out when your classes are, and talk about what that schedule is going to look like. Don't just kind of just go with it and we'll figure it out once we get there, right? And establish, what are your kind of non-negotiables and what are your things that, you can, kind of bend with a little bit, because starting out that way and having that understanding goes a long way, as opposed to letting things fester, right? Or, you ignoring other things and not even paying attention to, kind of what's going on. So I like to call it kind of like the charter, right? Just the kind of rules of engagement, right? So what do we need to do to kind of get along? And the other piece too is, you don't need to be best friends with your roommate, right? You see all these college movies and books and things like, oh, my best friend, from college. And you're like, oh, it's a wonderful thing. And I think in reality, that's not really the case. Like I always say, you want to be friendly with your roommate. You don't need to be best friends with your roommate. You just need to get along, right? And respect each other. So I think those are some good things that hopefully take to heart for parents that are watching. So let's move past now September and let's talk a little bit about now, October. Like, is there an October surprise coming around the corner that they may not know about?
I think one of the big things is that the amount of work is mounting, and the pressures related to the amount of academic work, and really the reality of balancing the social and the academic. But midterm grades happen in October around week 8, usually week 7 or 8, depending on the ebb and flow of your student semester. It could come a little bit earlier than week 8, could come a little bit later than week 8, but like some of the major assessments happen in October. And many colleges and universities do have midterm grades for first-year students, which gives students a good sort of reflection of how they're doing at that touch point during the semester. But I think it's important for students to really be able to assess at their particular university, what do the midterm grades mean? Because sometimes faculty members aren't good about doing early assessments, and the assessments come after the midterm. And so they really need to know, like, have that ability to kind of look at their syllabus and analyze what weight does each assessment have, And at the midterm, if I'm 30% through of the work and I have an A, that's a hell of a lot different than if I'm 60% through the work and have an A at that point. So it's a really good time for students to hyper analyze the syllabus and really figure out, we call it a syllabus analysis. We have students do a syllabus analysis and really determine like what the weights of each of their assessments are in each class and how that looks at midterm.
Yeah, I think that's great advice too, because at the high school level, there are so many people that are kind of watching out for that for lots of students, right? You know, teachers will kind of figure out what other departments are doing, or there are teams and things like that. So the responsibility kind of is abdicated to others, you know, and the students don't really take that. So now with this, I think you're right. Yeah, midterms are coming up. So what does that mean? That means you need to look at your calendar. And in 3 weeks, how many things do you have due on Tuesday and Wednesday of that week, right? And how do I start to maybe balance that out a little bit more? So that's obviously, you know, without question, you know, something to start to kind of plant that seed a little bit. So can we talk about a little bit this year, what has the whole COVID situation done to the start of the year, and how have you seen things different or maybe not? I don't know. You guys are, you know, boots on the ground there, so.
Yeah, I feel like one of the key challenges that I'm noticing with students, especially first year students who haven't had a prior experience at college, so they haven't necessarily established a friend group or haven't found their way around campus in the way that many of our sophomores, juniors, and seniors have already had the opportunity to do so. So they may be feeling that they need to meet more people, or they might be feeling a little bit of isolation, that their social circle is a little bit limited and maybe very different from how they pictured their college experience, right? So that's a major thing I think we have to keep coming back to, is that for many of our students, we've talked about college for so long, they may have seen their older siblings go to college, and so they had certain expectations of what it would be like when they got to college, and all of those expectancies have been violated one way or another. And so there's probably a little, I don't know if this is necessarily the right word, but there's a little bit of mourning for that, right? There's a little bit of sadness for what they wanted or in what they expected. And this is, you know, I have a soft spot, I'm sure you do too, Henry, with a first year student this year. Like their high school graduation was not what they expected either. So I think they're still processing that the world has changed around them, and what they've entered into wasn't what they expected at all.
Yeah. So once again, the book, right? You just got to get it. If you're a parent and your child is off at college, it is a great read, and it's a quick read, but it really does go month by month, you know, and where we're at, and we could go, you know, chapter and verse, and I think everyone would be, you know, just in awe of what's in here. But I want to respect everyone's time, and you guys took the time tonight to jump on and talk to me, so I could put this out to the people that I communicate with. But how do people get the book?
Amazon, baby.
Oh, of course, Amazon. Perfect. So your freshman is off to college. Laurie Hazard and Stephanie Carter are the authors, and the just a wealth of knowledge and insight. So I highly recommend it. I know that there are lots of other things that may be coming up, but I think the takeaway from what you guys are saying tonight is that communication is the key, right? Having a good understanding of what's available yourself as a parent. I know when I talk to parents about the college process, I always say, you know, there's a balance there where the student has to live it, but you have to pay for it. So everyone's paying for it in some way, shape, or form. So you need to understand the things that are available, because there are questions that parents should be asking. So I think this book is valuable for the senior parent, right? Or the junior parent who's thinking about sending their kids off to college, right? Because there's a lot of stuff when you read this, you're like, oh, wow, my kid's having a hard time with that now, right? They don't like to share now with their brother, right? So what do I do? So we can start to work on those things. And my mantra is, if you know better, you'll do better, right? So when you read this book, you will know, I apologize, my virtual background, so you can't see it, but when you read this book, you will know better and you'll be able to help your student. And what's beautiful about this is that what you advocate here is that the parent doesn't jump in and do it, right? You're just trying to help the kids build their capacity and get their tool belt in place so they can do it themselves. Because that's what we're really trying to do, right? Is get the kids to do all this on their own. So I don't know if anyone wants to ask a question. I know Nina has been sitting there shaking her head knowingly and supportively. So I know we touched on some things. I don't know if there's anything that perhaps you would like to ask while we've got them before we wrap up.
Can I unmute myself real quick?
Yes.
I was going to do chat, but I thought I would unmute myself.
No.
So the RA thing is something I hadn't considered before. So I'm definitely going to have her do that. And it just seems to me, I spoke with a friend today and I said, hey, I'm reaching out to my freshman mom friends. How's your daughter doing? She's like, she's doing great. They play volleyball every night. Their dorm has a volleyball and she's cooking in the kitchen with a bunch of friends. And is just explaining all these things. She ran for class president. And I thought, well, my daughter is telling me that really, Mom, we're not allowed out or in groups unless we go to classes or to eat. And I'm thinking, well, I can understand why she's struggling so much because that's a very different experience. So that's really not really a question as just as much as it's a
Observation.
Yeah. And I'm also wondering, well, there's this thing called Discord. I don't know if you all know about Discord, but she's pretty plugged in, but sometimes even here at home, she would be, oh, I didn't know that was going on, or, oh, and so I'm wondering if she's missing things. And so I don't know really what to do there other than.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. There are lots of things that are going on around kids. And some of it, I think it may be projecting that everything is fantastic, but it may not be. The other piece is, are you asking the right questions, right? So if you're a rule follower and someone says you can't do this and you're like, okay, I won't. And then you stop and you're like, okay, I'm not going to do that. But if you're a rule follower, but not a question asker, right? That could be limiting, right? So, all right, I understand the rules, but what if I wanted to do this, right? I know you said we can't do that, but is this okay? Like, how do I establish my boundaries, right? To ask the right questions, right? But it said, because there are some people that it said this, so it's exactly what I did, right? Okay, I understand the intent, but now let's ask some other follow-up questions because you can always be clearer, right? I always will say that no matter what direction I give to kids, I can always be clearer, right, to them. So it's again, so are you sure that's all you can do? Have you asked perhaps this? You know what I mean? Ladies, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was thinking about when you were talking is there's a generation gap, right? So listen, I'm a college professor, I'm an administrator. What we find with our students is we still really rely on email as the major form of communication with students, and colleges and universities really rely on email. So with my first year students, I always say to them, that's the main way your university is communicating with you about the rules, about what's going on in class, about the major university events and things that are going on. So I tell them that they really need to, and they hate it, that has to be part of their daily habit, like brushing their teeth, checking their email for 30 minutes, creating a to-do list out of the emails, and then are there any action items for them? Because I feel like if they're not in that routinized habit, they tend not to know what's going on around them because we're like the old people are still running the institution, you know,
Mhm,
and we're relying on email. And we do say to students, that's the way they have to pay attention to us and communicate with us. So I think that's a big part of it. And whatever the students' learning management system is at the institution, like Stephanie and I just had a conversation about that today. Bryant's a Blackboard campus, other campuses are Canvas campuses. So that's another sort of virtual space where they find out really what's going on. And I do agree with Henry about the sort of adolescent bravado maybe of your friend's daughter who's like, everything's okay. And it's really hard when your child's not doing okay, because my daughter last year in her first year of college, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And listen, I'm a college girl, right? I thought I was so excited for her to go away to school, and so was she. And everything imploded during her first year, and it was super painful to kind of work through all of that and help her like sort of get back on her feet. So I think there's that thing too of what it's supposed to be like, but then what really happens with your child, and there's such a learning curve of challenges.
I have to say, your
your
thing about the email is absolutely so true, because I can tell you when my first daughter went, you know, I would say to her, oh my God, so did you go to the blah, blah, blah? And did you see the, and she's like, no. And she's like, how do you know this? I'm like, well, because the school sent out emails and I read their emails. She goes, oh, I don't read their emails. I'm like, seriously? And like, literally things are, I'm like, oh my, like I knew more about what was going on the campus than she did.
Right,
So
no, it's
yeah,
so true.
absolutely.
The other thing I would love for you all to hit on is I think she is working super hard and trying to not fall behind and get homework done. And she said, Mom, I just found out I got all the teachers who give the most homework. I said, of course you did, honey.
Yeah.
But she said, I'm worried it's not going to leave me any time to spend time with my friends. And I said, you need to schedule that in, honey. You can't work harder. That's, people try to do that. They work harder. At some point you're going to implode. You've got to schedule 15 minutes for a walk. So can you all talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like one of the challenges that first year students often have is they take the exact strategies they used in high school and they apply them to college. And sometimes it just creates these really time consuming routines. Like, let's use the idea of like making flashcards, for instance, right? That's one of those things that maybe was something a student used in high school, but in college, the amount of flashcards they need is just not time efficient. So they're spending a lot of time doing those things to study or to get their homework done. And it's not necessarily the way they should be preparing for the exam or doing their homework. So I think on one side, I would say meeting with someone in the learning center, whether it's a tutor for one of the most challenging classes, or if there's a learning specialist at the institution who can kind of help a student map out some of the strategies they should be learning and honing in on. I think, and I'm going to throw this over to Laurie because this is she's coined this term about the 888 formula, which we talk to students a lot about balancing time between sleep, academics, and off time for themselves, for social activities or clubs. And so with that segue, Laurie, I'll toss the 888 to you.
Yeah. So yeah, and as I was listening to you too, and I have this, like, it's called a time or behavior management formula that students should kind of conceptualize the 24 hours in the day of the average human adult needs 8 hours of sleep. Okay, right? You have 8 hours of time that you need to work. So in college, you got to kind of think about that as 3 hours in class per day and 5 hours of schoolwork. And then that last 8 hours can be your leisure time, except if you have to work, you're going to have to steal from another area, right? You're going to have to give up some of your leisure time. Or if you're involved in student activities or or sports. The students have to kind of think about, how am I going to use my time? But in general, I was just talking to my daughter about this because she's been working 7 days a week on her schoolwork. And I said, you can't do that. If you work 7 days a week, you're going to be operating in burnout. So you need, like you said, Nina, you need to schedule leisure time. And so where is that leisure time going to be? And I feel like for college students, the sort of natural, it's like accountants can't take April off. They have to take time off at another time of the year. So college students, you can't really take Sundays off because you got to ramp up for Monday, but a good day of the week for college students to take off is Saturdays. So if they can think of like Saturdays as my space and place, that's my me time. But the rest of the week is when I'm going to schedule all of my schoolwork. At least they have that island in their calendar every week that they can say, I can really be motivated and work my tail off all week long, knowing that I have that Saturday where I can just exhale and breathe and have myself a grand old time, take a good part of Sunday off too, but then be ready like 4 or 5 o'clock on Sunday to prep myself for the week. So I think that's a good advice for everybody. Has to take a day off because you're going to be operating in burnout if you work every day. And for college, the college atmosphere, Saturday's the day, I think.
That's fantastic advice. And even the whole mindfulness piece that I like to talk about as well, the pockets of time that you can find even during that day, because 888 sounds good, 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours of work, 8 hours of play. The thing is that they don't line up like that in any given day, right? It's not I first sleep, then I go to work, and then I rest. In high school, it almost went that way, right? They went to sleep, they got up, they went to high school for 6 hours, and then they came home and they did a couple hours worth of homework, and then they had a lot of other time to do stuff. So the hours are all kind of all over the place. It's understanding where can I take that time in between my 10 o'clock that gets over at 11 and my 2 o'clock that starts. I've got a block of time there that maybe I want to go to the gym, right? Or maybe I want to just go for a walk, or maybe I want to use that time just to have lunch with a friend, right? Like, and plan that, don't just walk into the dining hall and go, hopefully somebody's here, right? Just, hey, you know what? I know you want to meet tomorrow for lunch, and then be in that moment and relax,
Yeah, for students, like I say to them, like, this is a values clarification exercise, really. It's like the question of how do you want to live your life? And they could certainly treat their college experience like a 9-to-5 job. They could decide that they're going to get up at 7:30 in the morning, be ready at 8 a.m., go to the library, and every time they're out of class, they go back to a study space, take an hour off for lunch, and work from 8 to 6, and then take weekends off. So they have to kind of decide how do they want to live their lives, because that's a formula that works too. Treating it like a 9-to-5 job, take an hour off for lunch, take your 15-minute breaks, AM, PM, and really like utilize those odd hours, like you said, in between time. So they have to really do that. Like I said, a values clarification. Do I want to be cranking things out on a Sunday, or would I really rather focus on my Monday through Friday? And I always say to students, listen, that's how life is going to probably be, right? If you're in college, you're not going to prepare yourself for working third shift somewhere. Yeah. I think you're going to go out into the professional world, and it's still kind of sort of 9-to-5.
Yep. Yeah, that's fantastic advice. So one more time, people, who are these ladies? They are the authors of this fantastic book. Your freshman is off to college. Stephanie Carter and Laurie Hazard. Thank you so much for your time tonight. I really appreciate it. This is recorded, so it's going to go on my Your Key to College website, Facebook page, whatever I'm doing, I don't even know, to share it. So tell your friends. Nina, thanks so much for jumping on. I do appreciate it. Head over to Amazon and get that book. Have a great evening, everybody.
All right,
thanks, Henry. Nice to meet you, Nina. Good luck.
Nice meeting you.
Take care.